Judith, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Our folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Judith Blackstone. Judith, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So Dr. Blackstone is the founder of the Realization Process, a method of embodied psychological and relational healing and non-dual spiritual awakening. She teaches workshops and teacher certification trainings throughout the U.S. and online. She's the author of several books, including The Fullness of the Ground, A Guide to Embodied Awakening, Trauma and the Unbound Body, The Healing Power of Fundamental Consciousness, as well as The Enlightenment Process, Belonging Here, A Guide for the Spiritually Sensitive Person, and The Empathic Ground. Judith, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I live in Woodstock, New York, upstate New York. I guess I grew up in Brooklyn and spent my early adulthood in Manhattan and then moved up here quite a few years ago.
Okay, awesome. So how did this start for you? How did this interest, this passion start for you?
Well, many years ago, I was a professional dancer in Manhattan, in New York City. Actually, I've been performing since I was 9 years old. And when I was 25, I injured my back quite severely and wasn't able to dance. And of course, I thought my life was over. I had put quite a lot of work into that. And so I lived in a dance studio in a loft in downtown Manhattan. And I was really quite injured, but I had people coming to the loft to take dance classes with me because that's how I made my living. So I lay on the floor and just really prayed for healing. I had, of course, gone to many body workers and doctors and so forth, and nothing helped. In fact, some of the things made it quite a bit worse. So little by little, I began to get these very subtle experiences, these inklings of a more subtle way that we can attune to ourselves, that we can actually get even deeper, more subtle level of attunement to ourselves than any sort of injuries, either psychological or physical. And since I had people coming to the loft to study with me, I began to teach them these very subtle attunements that I was finding, that I was experimenting with. And that was good because it meant that the work at the very beginning developed not just for my own, according to my own problems, but on a number of different bodies and beings. And then it just kept developing from there.
What type of dance? Dancer?
Modern dance.
Modern dance. Okay. And what happened to your back? How were you injured?
Well, I have a dislocation that I was born with, or that happened at birth, scoliosis, and something a little bit worse, where the vertebrae are forward on the sacrum. And when I was 25, a woman named Pina Bausch, who actually was quite a well-known choreographer, came to our dance company, the Pulse and Starter Dance Company, and she put me in a position that exactly mirrored the distortion in my back, which actually I'd been working with quite well for years. But having to hold that distorted position for a while then brought the spine much further out of position. It had been what we call a well-balanced, well-compensated scoliosis, where my head was over my sacrum, and now it wasn't. And then I had spine surgery where they actually fused me in that off-center position. So then I was really, really, really in trouble. And, I was just held in that. I couldn't even, it was hard to walk in a straight line. So I had quite a lot of work to do on myself. And that was the beginning of the work. I realized that I had to go through many, many levels of inward contact with myself in order to begin to bring everything back into alignment. And of course, as these things often are, it was really a saving grace that this happened, because I wound up in a much better place, both in my own body and in my life.
So you talked about these kind of attunements, and you used another word. I forget what it was. These kind of
Inward
gradation. And yeah, what is that? Be specific. What are you talking about when you say that?
Well, so two things. The inward contact with oneself is really the ability to live within one's body. Interestingly, we don't actually live within our bodies. Most of us live a bit in front of ourselves, for many reasons. Partly because we grew up in that kind of pattern of relating, that we feel like we have to come out of ourselves in order to really reassure the other person that we're making contact with them, or this is passed down from generation to generation, that sort of relational style. But it's mostly because in reaction to abrasive events in our life from day one or before that, which of course are unavoidable, that some things are going to be a bit unpleasant, too unpleasant to really take in altogether. We actually harden ourselves against experience. We shut down our heart just a little bit, for most of us. We constrict against any sort of sexual harassment, or even being touched in an unpleasant way. Might be certainly well intentioned, but for the young child or for the baby, it's not tolerable. So we start to constrict our body, and in that constriction, it blocks our ability to actually live fully within the body. So a lot of the psychological aspect of the realization process focuses on finding those constrictions, releasing them. We have a technique for doing that in the realization process, and then inhabiting the body more fully. And the interesting thing is that the more fully we inhabit our body, the more open we are to the world around us. So that inward contact with ourselves is exactly the same as openness and responsiveness, fluid responsiveness, emotionally, in every way, to the world around us. So it's a process of regaining ourselves in that way. And now the attunement is that as we do that, our perception becomes more refined, more subtle. Instead of seeing just the surface of things, we have a sense that we can see deeply within them, especially people or animals, right? That we're not just connecting surface to surface, but we're actually attuning in a more subtle way to the world around us and to our own being. So we get to a more subtle, I'm going to use the word dimension, but I don't mean it in a hokey way. We get to a more subtle level of our being, right? And that most subtle level of our being, which I call fundamental consciousness, is an undivided level of consciousness that we can actually experience, pervading our whole body and even pervading the world around us, so that everything appears to be both solid, made of the stuff that we're made of, and at the same time made of this very, very subtle, pervasive space, consciousness. And that's how the realization process becomes a technique for nondual realization. So it's both a psychological healing, a relational healing, an embodiment technique, but primarily it's a way to experience that oneness when we uncover that undivided space of consciousness pervading our own being and everything around us.
This is really fascinating to me, because I don't think I've ever talked about this in this way on this podcast. So I'm very excited right now. This idea of living in front of ourselves, to me, is really interesting. I mean, it's a very powerful visual, and I can feel what that means. But I want to ask you, you said when you got hurt, when you got injured, that became almost like an opportunity for you. What were you doing specifically for yourself? Walk us through that. How did that come about for you?
That's a very, very long story. But it began with just lying on the floor, really surrendering, giving, in a sense, giving up, the despair that, I don't know, maybe you can only feel at 25 when you feel like, that's it for you. And I just lay on the floor, and I realized, after a while, that if I actually dropped my weight to the ground, what felt like currents of waves of energy began to come up from the ground and move through my body and actually pull my spine into alignment. That was amazing to me because, of course, now, in our realm, we know about, in our community, we know about energy, but I was quite unfamiliar with it. So it was quite an interesting and alarming and amazing experience for me. But really what was amazing was to feel that something natural, something just innate in nature came through me and started to pull me into alignment, actually to center me, to heal me. So, and that was something that then years later, I found again when I began to meditate, that we can just sit and open to that current that that comes up and brings us deeper and deeper and deeper within. And the more centered we are, here's another interesting thing: the more centered we are, the deeper we are. So, so that's how it started. That was how it started. Just lying on the floor, and then knock on the door. It's 5 o'clock. My class is here. They want to learn how. They want to dance, and I'm like lying there. And so I lay them all down, and we all did these open to these subtle experiences.
So are we talking about acceptance? Are we talking about, use the word surrendering, being open to our own experiences and what's going on?
That's definitely actually crucial for the whole process. If we don't accept where we are in the moment, we can't go anywhere from there. So yes, that's certainly part of it. Now, in the realization process, we don't just open, we don't just surrender, we also do these very careful inward attunements, which take a little bit of concentration, not a whole lot, but a little bit, to focus deeper within, so that when we do just let go of ourselves, we don't let go from the surface of ourselves into the space around us, but we let go from the internal depth of ourselves, right? And that's when we let go into that more subtle dimension, right? Fundamental consciousness. Otherwise, we're just kind of expanding energetically, right? But we can actually focus and focus and focus until we can let go from that innermost core of ourselves.
Now, when you started developing this, when you started intentionally constructing this process, at what point, walk us through when you said, okay, I want to work with people in this way, utilizing this process. How did that come about?
That also took many stages. I started out teaching dance. I'd actually been teaching dance for years by the time I was 25. And so I was already in that kind of relation with people. People are very vulnerable when they're dancing, when they come to learn to dance, so I already was in that sort of caring role with people. And then I began to train as a body worker. I trained in Alexander technique, but a very particular kind of Alexander technique that was taught by a woman named Lydia Yohe, which was mostly table work and really, really her own innovation on it. And so I did this table work, body work, for a number of years, maybe 5 years, 8 years. And I began to, at the same time as I was teaching dance in my loft, I began to notice that people would feel great for a couple of days, and then they'd come back the following week and sort of be back where they were. And I wanted to go deeper with them. You know, they would also go into emotional pain on the table, and I didn't know how to deal with that. You know, my family's way of dealing with emotional pain was to just keep busy. You know, that was always the advice I got. You know, just keep busy. You know,
works for a lot of us.
Yeah, right. Works for a lot. Or eat something, right? Eat something. So rather than that, I began to train in psychotherapy. I did a 3-year training program, the Institute for Integrative Psychotherapy. Rebecca Troutman and Richard Erskine. This was in the late 70s, we're talking about, right? A long time ago. And that was actually quite a wonderful training because we were like a group of 20 people, and we would work with each other, and Richard and Rebecca would give us feedback while we were working. You know, it was quite a good way to learn what worked and what didn't work, and so forth, and to experiment in a safe space where we all felt safe there. So I did that training program, and then I went into private practice, and for a long time I taught the realization process. It wasn't named yet, and I did psychotherapy, and then sometimes I would combine the two. In 1987, I began to do workshops at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, and that's when I realized the work needed a name. It wasn't yet the realization process. I had a different name for it, but it began to become a more coherent sort of process. I began to realize that I could teach a sequence of practices for this kind of attunement for the workshops at Esalen. And so a lot of the work developed there.
So who would you say this process is for?
Well, it does take some sensitivity. You know, I mean, pretty much everyone who's come to do the work with me is able to. In fact, everyone is able to. They're even able to get that pervasive space, although it can take sometimes a little bit of practice. It can even take a couple of years. You know, sometimes people, you know, I'll go on and on about how this work actually pervades the furniture, pervades your body, and 2 years later they'll suddenly turn around and look at me and say, you know, it feels like the space is going right through the furniture. And I'm like, that's right. So it can take a little practice, and some people get it right away because they've always experienced something like that. And so it's pretty much for anyone who wants it, who feels drawn to it, or wants to feel deeper contact with themselves. The interesting thing is that when we live within the body, we have much more confidence. You know, there's actual that sense of self-possession at the same time as there's that transcendence into the self-other oneness. There's at the same time, because we're experiencing fundamental consciousness as the ground of our individual being, at the same time as it pervades everything around us, there's a sense of self-possession. Like, oh, I take up space, I take up internal volume. And that goes a long way to helping with social anxiety, many of the things that sensitive people deal with, feeling overwhelmed by the world around them, and that kind of thing, because we actually feel that we exist. We have a sense of our own existence. Hard to explain in words, but it's a palpable feeling. You know, there we are. Doesn't, you know, the word presence doesn't quite get it. It's something a little more mysterious than that, but we can feel our sense of existence, and we feel as vital as other human beings, as the world around us. We no longer feel overwhelmed.
What you're talking about almost seems to me to be like the antithesis of anxiety.
That's right. Yeah.
And yet it seems what you're talking about doesn't seem easy. It seems like it requires definitely some intentionality. I would even use the word courage too. I mean, a full embodiment of who we are.
Yes. Well, that doesn't happen overnight. It's a very gradual process. Really, it's like a ripening inward in a
Mm.
way. We do the practice, feel that you're in your feet, feel that you're in your legs, and so forth. And then, we can feel that for, a few moments, and then we lose it. And then we do the practice again. We get a little bit further. And then one day we're just there. So that's a gradual process. We don't open, and this is really important in the realization process. We don't open further than we can tolerate,
Mm.
right? And we release not into open space, but into that internal ground of our being. So we right away feel that we're more of ourself, more of our emotional being, more of our actual feel of power in our belly, more of our voice, more of our understanding. So we're releasing into our internal being. So it doesn't, I mean, it, of course, initially takes courage just to set out on any sort of path like this. But there are no alarming moments in it,
You
right?
know,
It doesn't take
again,
courage in the process.
yeah. Kind of going back to this idea of living in front of ourselves. Why do we do that? Why do we tend to do that?
Well, several reasons. One, where we learn how to relate to other human beings that way. If our parents come, and this is, most of us don't live in our bodies, so very likely our parents are coming out of themselves, either that or they're closed off, shut off, or they're coming way out in order. So we also come out to meet them, right? We also come out to concentrate. Children need to memorize, they're tested every few weeks on whatever they're learning. So we need to really focus and concentrate outside of ourselves. But the real reason, the big reason, are these constrictions within the body, that they actually don't allow us to make internal contact with ourselves. So then we have to live outside of ourselves. It's actually a rare thing, and this is another just amazing fact about human nature. It's a rare thing that people are actually living within the internal space of their body. That's a mind body, consciousness body integration, right? It's really oneness, right? And then we actually experience ourselves as conscious everywhere in our body. It's an unusual state. It's not our usual state. So people have been working towards experiencing that for thousands of years. It always has taken some amount of intentionality to get there.
It almost feels like we're pushing our own selves outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's almost something sad about that. That we're right. Well, I mean, it just seems to go, in a sense, go against who we are. Why
Yeah.
are we? Do we need? Why can't we embody who we are? Why are we stepping outside of ourselves in order to relate to one another?
Yes. There, you could say it's sad if it weren't just the typical human condition.
And yet, when we meet someone, are we talking about an aspect of authenticity here, or
Yes.
authenticity in and of itself here, complete authenticity?
Yes, that's another thing I wanted to mention. Besides taking up space and feeling our sense of existence, we also feel real. And it takes this again probably takes some sensitivity to feel, but that awful feeling of not being real. I have this mask. If I go to a party, I have to be a certain way, and we become aware of that. We become aware that something is not quite
Mm-hmm.
real. And when we become aware of that, that's a good step. When we inhabit the body and we uncover this undivided ground of ourselves, we feel real. It feels, oh, this is finally who I really am. And we look around, and even our vision, not that we can see better. It's not, it's not like wearing glasses, but there is something about the world being as it really is, to some extent, right? More, less projected upon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, less subjectively distorted.
So, in terms of your books, I mean, the first, The Fullness of the Ground, The Guide to Embodied Awakening, Trauma and the Unbound Body, where does trauma come in terms of the realization process?
Right. So I'm using the word trauma quite loosely. I'm using it in the realization process to mean anything that we were not able to fully experience, right? So if we were not able to fully mourn the loss of someone as a child, if we were not able to fully open to the sound of our parents' angry voices, for example, right? If we were not able to fully take in the smell of cigarette smoke or whiskey, whatever, in our childhood environment. It's usually when we're children that we form ourselves in this way. Although as teenagers, if we're not able to take the looks that we're getting, at our budding bodies, and we have to shield ourselves in some way, or we actually are attacked or molested in some way, we definitely have to protect ourselves against that. So these are all, this is a very good part of nature, that we're able to protect ourselves in this way from being shattered. This keeps us from being shattered, but at the same time, it does fragment us internally, right? So we cut off those parts of ourselves that we constrict, we no longer in contact with. So we actually, to some extent, lose our emotional ability, our ability to feel love. We, to some extent, lose our mental clarity, sense of mental clarity. We, to some extent, lose the actual feel of power, our good power within our body. We may lose our ability to feel sexual pleasure or to feel any sort of tactile pleasure. So as we let go of these holding patterns and enter into ourselves more fully, all of this richness of our own being and the corresponding richness of our perception of the world around us comes into the fore.
And all the richness of emotions and pain, I would assume, also comes
That's
up
right.
with that.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not like we never feel pain again. What we may get over is some of the extra pain that's projected from our childhood, right? So the many other losses. But if we lose someone that we love, yes, of course, we're going to feel pain. If something is really threatening us, we're going to feel fear, and we should feel fear. Right? If something is oppressing us, we're going to feel anger, and we should feel anger. So yes, we get the appropriate emotional ability, right? The ability to respond appropriately without that extra childhood. I'm angry, and I'm so angry because of something that happened to me when I'm 4. So now that you're making me angry, it's going to be horrific. That starts to dissipate. But we still have our full and very nuanced emotional capacity, which is, of course, the richness of our lives.
So as we kind of wind down here, Judith, I know on your website you have events and programs. What's coming up for you? How are you working with people? Who are you teaching? Who are you helping?
I'm at this point retired from private practice. I'm teaching workshops and teacher certification trainings in the work. There's actually a training starting October 6th, meditation training. There's three main trainings: the non-dual meditation aspect of the work, the embodiment aspect of the work, and the psychological healing, which I call healing ground aspect of the work. All of that is on the website, realizationprocess.org.
Okay.
And then I have wonderful people who are teaching the work, who've been through all the trainings and have been teaching for many years. And all of their events are also listed on the website.
We'll have that listed up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Once again, Judith Blackstone, her website is realizationprocess.org. Judith, thank you so much for being here. I mean, you are so inspiring. It's, honor having you on here.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
You too.